Welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the product or service desirability component of the feasibility analysis. Okay? And here, it's important to do this because you want to make sure that there's not any obvious flaws in whatever you're doing before you rush out and start raising money and investing a lot of time and money. And one great example of the effectiveness of actually it was a product desirability analysis occurred when I was teaching my previous job back in Los Angeles. And I had a student, he was a brilliant engineer, right? And he was at the airport and he noticed a lady was struggling with a stroller trying to get on an airplane. And so he designed this really cool stroller that could fold and collapse into a very small size. It had like a lot of locking mechanisms stuff. It was a cool thing. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I thought it was a really neat idea. And I said, you know what, you rock with that, but let's do just a little bit of a feasibility analysis before we go to a pitch competition. And so he interviewed some mothers, because obviously mothers would be people who would be interested in using a stroller, right? And one of the mothers said, you can't use this design, it's dangerous for children. He said, well, why? No, it's great, you know, the mother can hold the child easy, you know, it's easy to hold the stroller. And she said, no, watch this. And as she was trying to put the stroller, like collapse it, there was a latch. And she said, you see that? The way it snaps together? A small child, because they put their fingers and everything, will put their finger in there and lose their finger. And the guy said, no, that's impossible. Like, that's not going to happen. She said, watch this. She stuck a pencil in there, and she put it together. It cut right through the pencil. So you know it would cut off a small child's finger, right? So this made the guy go back to the drawing board and look at his stroller from a mother's perspective. And that saved him potentially millions of dollars in, you know, liability from lawsuits, right? That's a great example of conducting a financial feasibility analysis. I did another one where a gentleman wanted to have an app that was kind of like Foursquare, but it was used for pickup basketball games. And his idea was that you would have this app and you could like trash talk people off, you know, after the game was over and all this other kind of stuff. And he asked some pickup basketball players, you know, did they like this idea or not? And most of them said, no, I want to leave all the trash talking on the court. I don't want that to continue following me for the rest of my life. I don't like this app. It brings in too much negativity. So while the inventor thought it was a great idea and he had the technical prowess to design the app, potential customers steered him away from that. So they convinced him it was not a desirable idea. And so here's some questions that you can ask yourself to determine if this product is desirable or not. Ask people, does this make sense? Do you understand what problem I am solving? Right? You know, every opportunity is solving some sort of a problem, right? So does this make sense? Does my problem statement, does it work? Can you follow why I'm doing this? Is this something that is reasonable? Is this something that a person using a modicum of common sense would find valuable? And asking your customers, is this something that makes you excited? Right? Do you think this will improve your life in some way? Or do you see how it could improve someone else's life in some way? Another question is, does this take advantage of some sort of a broader economic trend or some sort of broader market trend? So is it, you know, kind of riding that wave of what's cool right now? Does it solve some sort of a gap in the marketplace? Is this a real opportunity or is it just an idea in my head or an opportunity that shouldn't leave my head? Also ask them, is this the right time to introduce this product or service to the market, right? Timing is everything. You know, you might not want to introduce a product if, you know, in some way there's some sort of a political upheaval that could be kind of interpreted as negative for that product. Or maybe there's not the technological capabilities to support that. You know, I always think about one of the coolest things I ever saw was the hydrogen fuel up stations that were all over California. You know, put hydrogen into vehicles. Great idea, but I think the timing was off. I mean, there were not enough cars available on the road that could take advantage of hydrogen, and so this whole system, you know, really hasn't been too successful. Same thing with, I had one entrepreneur who sold conversion kits to convert your gasoline engine to a pressurized natural gas engine, like a lot of public buses use. It's brilliant. I mean, the gas is cheap, the natural gas is cheap and all that stuff. It was a great idea, but the problem is there isn't an infrastructure in place right now to support, you know, actually getting your vehicle filled up with this pressurized natural gas. So the timing is just not there right now. And then, of course, again, are there any fatal flaws in the design? Again, thinking of that baby stroller that would have cut off a small child's finger. Okay. So ask yourself these questions. And then what you want to do is you want to administer what we call a concept test. And that's where you identify what you're trying to do in about 1 to 2 pages single spaced. Okay? So you actually want to try to put your ideas down on paper, and you want to make it sound like some sort of a coherent narrative or some sort of a coherent story. You have some sort of a problem and you're trying to solve it. Okay? So a good concept statement or a good concept test will have some sort of, this is my problem, this is how I'm solving it, and this is why you should care. That should all be in there. You might want to talk about the basic features of the product or service that you're trying to sell. You definitely want to talk about your role in the process. You're kind of hinting at your management prowess, which we'll talk a little bit later. Talk a little bit about the broader market conditions, and talk about how much startup money you think might be needed. It's basically summarizing the entire feasibility analysis in one page. Okay, so that's what you want to do. Now, you use this concept statement to interview potential people for your field work and your feasibility analysis. But don't take a clipboard and shove it in somebody's face and say, hey, read this and tell me what you think of the idea. No, what you need to do is you need to memorize your concept statement or your concept test, have that memorized, and then go out to people and just be ready to summarize it in 3 or 4 sentences just to get them interested, so maybe they'll ask some more questions, and then mentally you can be referring back to your concept test. Okay? So that's what you want to wind up doing. It's just a guide for you, but don't ask somebody to read something, especially on a clipboard. It really turns off people. So just engage in a conversation. Okay? So once you've kind of done the concept statement, then you're going to start looking at the demand. And this is where good field work comes into play. The first thing you want to do is take your concept statement or your concept test and tie it into a buying intention survey. Now, the buying intention survey is where you basically go out and talk to people and ask, well, what do you think of this product, right? And you want to ask broad questions, right? The worst kinds of questions are going to be the ones that have yes or no responses. Do you think this is a good idea? Yes or no. Those aren't very good. And a lot of people, they'll just write down yes. That's pretty useless, right? Instead, ask things about what do you like and dislike about this product, and then let them tell you, and then ask why. This technique is what we call peeling back the onion. You don't necessarily go in with some sort of a vision of these are the questions and I'm just going to check it off really quickly, but you go in understanding that this is a conversation where you're actually going to do a lot more listening than you are talking, right? So you tell a little bit of a story about what you're doing, but then the rest of the time you take story listening. And you try to incorporate the responses you get and use that for good follow-on questions. And as you get better follow-on questions as you're asking people, you can incorporate those new questions into the surveys that you use for follow-on interviews. Now, a lot of people say, you can also use SurveyMonkey and Mechanical Turk and some of this stuff to fill out the surveys. I mean, I guess if you're trying to do this in a hurry and you need 1,000 data points, yes, you can do that. But my experience is the results that you're going to get will be of limited utility because people are in a hurry. They're just trying to complete the surveys and get it over with. Same thing, a lot of people like to use the 7-point Likert scale, would definitely buy, probably won't buy. They like to use that, but it doesn't tell you why, right? You can have everybody check, I would definitely buy this product, but since you don't know why they would definitely buy that product, you don't even know what kinds of features to emphasize or what are the good things about that, right? So I would refrain from using anything that can be yes or no binary answers, and I'd also refrain from using scales. You're better off getting 20 really rich, fleshy results from your interviews than you are getting 10,000 data points that are just kind of yeses and nos or something on a 7-point Likert scale, right? A lot of people also say how much would you be willing to pay for this product or service, and they'd like you to check $10 to $100. I don't find that very useful. Instead, what I would say is, how much would you be willing to pay for this product? Let them tell you, and then ask them why would you pay $10 versus $15, or why would you pay $15 versus $100? Because they get you that extra information, right? Now, a lot of times you can use this feasibility analysis as, how should I put it? By going into those fleshy interviews, you can see all the fatal designs in your product flaw. It can save you that amount of money, from doing something, and spending a lot of money on a loan for equipment or employees. So you can avoid some of that stuff, but it can also get you brand new ideas that you didn't think about, right? Maybe someone says, well, I don't like it because it's not in pink, and for like a baby stroller. And if 20 people all tell you that they don't like the fact that it's not in pink, well then you probably that's maybe not something you thought about. Now you know your strollers need to be painted pink, right? So that's probably something that you need to consider. Okay, so those are the basic things that you want to do on a feasibility analysis, at least from the perspective of the product and service demand and product service desirability. Okay, at least for your field work. I'm trying to think of some other points that you want to consider. When you interview people, this is another mistake that a lot of people make. When you interview people, try to get some basic biographical information on them, like their name, an approximate age, what their profession is, and if they have any personal interest, like a hobby that would be related to what you're doing. So let me give an example. Let's say I'm trying to open a gym. So I asked this guy, his name is Dave. He's about, and you can ask people how old you are, or you can say which age group would you fit into. Some people don't want to ask how old they are. And so you say Dave is, around 25 years old. What's his occupation? He's a plumber, and he never has been to the gym before. Okay, that's stuff you need to know. So then you think about it, well, what would I have to do to get Dave the plumber into the gym? And you can ask those kinds of questions. And once you get that data, once you've asked your different questions, also take a moment and do a reflection. Observe. Well, Dave is really against the idea of opening a gym, but he hates working out. And so, I need to take his opinion with a grain of salt. Versus Steve, who is a bodybuilder, had all sorts of great things to do, very supportive of the idea of a gym, but maybe he's asking for things that wouldn't appeal to my actual customer base, and so I need to take that with a grain of salt, right? So always make sure you do a reflection, and as you're writing your field notes for your feasibility analysis, I usually recommend that you put your reflections in bold so that your eye will come to them very quickly, and those reflections at the end, if you have, 20, 50, 1,000 reflections, that can kind of help you recraft and retool the individual product or service that you're trying to do. Now I always get asked, well, how many surveys should I do? You do it until you get to what we call saturation. Saturation is that point where like, ugh, I got to hear this again. That's the point of saturation. Once you start hearing the same answers over and over and over, you know that you either need to ask better questions or you can stop doing your survey. But when you continue to get new information every time, then you probably need to keep asking questions. And that point of saturation could be with 20 surveys or it could be with 1,000 surveys. There's no magic number here, okay? So you do it to the point of saturation. Now, another way that you can assess product and service demand is, quite frankly, by using a public library or your university library. In fact, there are three great databases that I highly recommend that you look into. BizMiner, IBISWorld, and ValueLine. Okay, so BizMiner and IBISWorld, respectively, are databases that help you assess competition and competitive analyses. So what IBISWorld will do, it'll actually draw a stakeholder map for you. Okay, so it'll draw the stakeholder map. So let's say that you want to be in the restaurant industry. It'll look at your different suppliers. Like suppliers could include, meat manufacturers or grain manufacturers, dairy manufacturers, utility companies, and it tells you all the conditions that impact those industries that are related to your particular restaurant. That's very helpful. That can help you get a good feel for the product or service desirability. It'll also track different kinds of customer groups for your particular industry. Very useful. BizMiner, on the other hand, tracks individual businesses, and it can go like super in depth. I mean, we did an exercise when I was teaching in LA, and we were comparing Spanish restaurants to Mexican restaurants in downtown Los Angeles. You get that level of granularity, how much money roughly these restaurants are making, etc. I even did an exercise with my students, and we looked at rainwater collection utilities in Texas. There's 9 of them, at least according to BizMiner at that time, versus more conventional utility companies. So it can really help you get a feel for what your competition looks like. I also like ValueLine. It is something to help you invest in stocks, but ValueLine is a great tool to help you get a feel for general industry conditions. And of course, you can do similar things with Yahoo Finance as well. So I highly recommend you take advantage of library resources and library databases. And those are the biggest components that you need to be worried about for the product and service feasibility, which includes product and service desirability and product service demand. In the next few videos, we're going to start looking at industry and target market analysis. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Oh, and as always, hit that like button. If I know I say it all the time, but hit that like button for the like, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions, post them below.